The sprawling, Spanish-style mansion on Miami's coastline was once home to the glamorous Dorothy Lamour, a beloved actress of the golden age of Hollywood. Though decades have passed since her death, neighbors and visitors claim her presence lingers in the estate, manifesting in eerie and unexplainable phenomena. It was during an unusually quiet evening that Jacob Barnes, a journalist researching old Hollywood legends, was invited to stay at the house, now owned by a private collector. The current owner, who preferred anonymity, had shared cryptic anecdotes about glowing lights in the garden and voices that seemed to sing snippets of forgotten songs. Jacob arrived just before sunset. The sea breeze carried a salty tang, and the house stood against the horizon like a faded postcard. Inside, the decor retained its vintage charm: polished wooden floors, framed black and white photographs, and an upright piano in the corner of the sitting room. As night fell, Jacob decided to explore the garden. Armed with his flashlight, he wandered along the brick pathways, edged by overgrown hedges and bougainvillea vines. The air was warm, but an unnatural chill swept through the garden, raising goosebumps on his arms. It began subtly, a soft hum, faint and melodic. Jacob froze, straining to identify the sound. It grew louder, distinct yet otherworldly. The melody carried the unmistakable cadence of a love song, its lyrics too faint to decipher. He scanned the garden, his flashlight beam dancing across the shrubbery. Then he saw them. Soft, flickering lights hovered among the palm trees. They were ethereal, like glowing orbs, drifting lazily through the air. Jacob tried to rationalize the phenomenon: fireflies or distant lanterns, but their movement was deliberate, almost as if they were dancing to the whispered tune. As he stepped closer, the whispers intensified. Words became clearer, repeating a fragment of a song he couldn't place. Dream, dream, until... The voice was smooth, melancholic, and hauntingly familiar. Jacob's heart raced as he reached the spot where the lights had gathered. But as quickly as they appeared, they vanished. The whispers ceased, leaving only the sound of the ocean crashing against the shore. Back inside, Jacob spoke with the housekeeper, an elderly woman who had worked there for decades. She nodded knowingly as he recounted his experience. "Miss Lamour always loved to sing in the garden," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. Even in her final years, she'd hum her favorite tunes while tending to her flowers. Some say she never stopped. Though skeptical, Jacob couldn't deny the vividness of his encounter. He spent the rest of the night in the sitting room, listening for the faint strains of song that seemed to drift on the wind. And as dawn broke over the Miami coastline, he knew he had witnessed something extraordinary, a fleeting glimpse into the timeless spirit of Dorothy Lamour. As dawn's first light crept through the large arched windows, Jacob barely slept. The garden's haunting melody lingered in his mind, playing on a loop like a half-remembered tune from a distant dream. He had planned to leave that morning, but the pull of the house was irresistible. Something was unfinished, something he needed to understand. The housekeeper, Rosa, seemed to sense his hesitation over breakfast. She placed a cup of coffee in front of him and spoke softly. "There's more to see, you know," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of waves crashing in the distance. "The library upstairs. Miss Lamour spent hours there. Some say she left messages behind." Intrigued, Jacob set his cup down and asked her to elaborate. But Rosa merely smiled, a fleeting, knowing expression, before retreating into the kitchen. The library was at the far end of the second floor, a room lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling. Sunlight filtered through thick, yellowed curtains, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. A faint floral scent, lavender, perhaps hung in the air, too strong to be natural but not overwhelming. Jacob's attention was drawn to a small, lacquered writing desk near the window. It was pristine, as if someone had recently wiped it clean, but a single sheet of paper lay on its surface. The handwriting, in faded ink, was delicate and precise. It read, "Sing to the stars, and they will guide you home." A shiver coursed through him as he traced the letters with his fingers. The phrase was eerily familiar. It was part of the whispered song he had heard in the garden. But how could that be? His pulse quickened. He snapped a photo of the note with his phone, then placed it carefully back on the desk. As he stepped away, a low creak broke the silence. Jacob turned to find one of the bookshelves shifting slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if nudged by a breath of air. Without thinking, he approached it and tugged gently at the edge. To his astonishment, the shelf swung outward, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passage. The air inside was cooler, damp, and smelled faintly of seawater. The passage led downward, spiraling into the unknown. Jacob hesitated. Every rational part of him screamed to leave it alone, but curiosity gnawed at him with relentless fervor. He stepped inside, his phone flashlight cutting through the gloom. The stone walls were lined with faded photographs, framed but dusty, each capturing moments from Dorothy Lamour's career. Her standing with Bing Crosby, her in her signature sarong, her holding an unplaceable trophy. As he descended deeper, the whispers began again, faint and fragmented. But this time they weren't in English. The melody remained, weaving through the air like a living thing. But the words had transformed into a language Jacob couldn't recognize. Yet, inexplicably, he felt as if he understood them. At the bottom of the passage was a heavy wooden door, its surface carved with intricate patterns of stars and waves. His hand trembled as he reached for the iron handle. The whispers grew louder, almost urging him forward, mingling with what sounded like the faint crash of distant waves. When Jacob pushed the door open, what he saw made him freeze in place, the light from his phone flickering in the sudden cold. The room beyond seemed impossibly vast, far larger than the dimensions of the house should allow, and at its center was. The melody stopped abruptly, leaving him in deafening silence. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. And at its center was a pool of water, dark and glassy, shimmering faintly under a soft, untraceable light. The walls of the room curved upward, lined with what looked like hundreds of mirrors. Each reflected not Jacob, but fragmented images of Dorothy Lamour, her youthful smile, her piercing eyes, her unmistakable silhouette in the iconic sarong. Some mirrors showed her mid-laugh. Others caught her in moments of quiet contemplation. Yet, in a few, her expression was different, serious, even mournful, as if she were staring out through the glass and seeing him. Jacob stepped closer to the pool, the air around it colder with every step. The surface rippled slightly, despite no apparent source of disturbance. He knelt at the edge, his flashlight flickering again as if protesting his approach. The whispers returned, louder than ever, but now layered with faint laughter, distant applause, and an almost imperceptible sobbing. Jacob felt the weight of unseen eyes on him, a presence so heavy it made his chest tighten. He leaned forward, his reflection becoming clearer in the water, when suddenly it shifted. Instead of his face, Dorothy's appeared in the pool. Her lips were moving, but no sound came through. She looked directly at him, her gaze intense and imploring. Jacob's heart pounded as he tried to decipher her expression. Was it a warning? A plea? Before he could react, the water in the pool began to glow faintly, a soft, golden light spreading outward in delicate patterns like veins. The whispers turned into a crescendo of voices, some melodic, others fragmented and desperate. Words swirled in his mind, half-formed phrases in English, French, and other languages he couldn't identify. Help me, find the song, the key. Jacob stumbled backward, his mind racing. The note on the desk, the hidden passage, the shifting reflections, they all felt connected. A puzzle left for him to unravel. But why him? He didn't believe in fate, but the pull of this place, of her voice, felt undeniable. A sudden knock echoed from above, reverberating through the passage. It was distant, as if someone or something was pounding on the library floor above. Jacob froze, torn between the eerie call of the room and the unnerving sound from where he'd come. The light in the pool pulsed, almost like a heartbeat, drawing him back toward it. Jacob! The whisper of his name was unmistakable this time, clear and sharp, spoken by Dorothy's voice. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. His head whipped around, but the room remained empty save for the mirrors, the pool, and the oppressive feeling that he was no longer alone. Then, from one of the mirrors, her image moved. Not reflected, but alive within the glass. She extended her hand, her fingers brushing against the edge of the frame, as if trying to push through. Jacob's breath hitched. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to climb back up the passage and never look back. But something deeper, a curiosity beyond reason, rooted him in place. His trembling hand reached out toward the mirror. Before he could touch it, the pool erupted with a soundless surge of light, engulfing the room in blinding radiance. And then silence. Darkness. The faint hum of a song drifted through the void, pulling Jacob forward once again. For a long, terrifying moment, Jacob stood motionless in the dark, unable to see anything but the aftershocks of the blinding light that had swallowed the room. The faint hum of the song, like a forgotten lullaby, wrapped around him, vibrating deep within his bones. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, drowning out everything else. But then the light slowly began to fade, revealing a scene that made his stomach tighten in dread. The mirrors were gone. In their place were walls smooth, featureless, and stretching impossibly far in every direction. The room had expanded. It was no longer a confined space, but a labyrinthine expanse of gleaming white walls, each one reflecting a fraction of the room's dim glow. But there was no door, no exit, only the vast emptiness, and the eerie echo of Dorothy's voice in his mind, growing louder with each passing moment. The song, "You Must Find It," the voice was clearer now, tinged with desperation. And as the sound filled his head, Jacob realized something even more disturbing. The walls themselves seemed to hum in tune, vibrating slightly, as if the entire room were alive, breathing in rhythm with the song. The whispers began again, this time not in his ears, but in his mind, shaping themselves into words he could almost understand. The key lies beneath the silence. Jacob's breath caught in his throat as he took a step forward. With every step, the air grew heavier, more oppressive, as though something unseen was watching, waiting. The whispers grew frantic, swirling around him, urging him to move faster. But the farther he ventured into the labyrinth, the more twisted and fragmented the path became. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet shifted. The walls seemed to tilt, and Jacob stumbled, catching himself just in time. He blinked, disoriented, as the space around him seemed to distort. What had once been smooth, featureless walls now began to reveal faint traces of shapes, hidden figures etched into the surface, their outlines barely perceptible. At first, Jacob thought they were just cracks in the walls. But as he leaned in closer, his breath hitching in disbelief, he realized they were faces. Faces that seemed to flicker in and out of focus, like ghosts trapped within the very walls themselves. Some were smiling, others scowling, and others were frozen in expressions of sorrow, their eyes following him as he moved. "Miss Lamour," Jacob whispered, the name slipping from his lips like a prayer. No answer. But then, in the distance, something glimmered, a faint light, flickering like a candle's flame. The air around it felt different, charged with an electric anticipation. It was coming from a doorway, barely visible between the walls of shifting faces. Without thinking, Jacob moved toward it, the whispers urging him on, louder now, pushing him forward. As he drew closer, the humming intensified, blending with the whispers, until they became one harmonious sound, an ancient, mournful melody. It was unmistakable, Dorothy's voice, clearer than before, singing in a language that felt as old as time itself. The doorway loomed ahead, but as Jacob reached it, he hesitated. The air was thick with an energy that made his skin crawl. The doorway wasn't just a passage, it was a threshold, a boundary that seemed to pulse with life. On the other side, he could hear soft laughter, like the faint sound of a crowd at a distant theater. And then, as if reaching out from beyond the door, a warm, familiar perfume filled the air, a mixture of jasmine and something sweeter, intoxicating. It was unmistakable. Dorothy. The melody shifted again, now a haunting lullaby, as if it were calling him, coaxing him to step into the unknown. The whispers grew softer. Now not a chorus, but a single voice, Dorothy's voice, begging him. Please, finish the song. You must find the key. Jacob felt the weight of her plea settle in his chest, and without thinking, he stepped forward, crossing the threshold. And immediately, everything changed. The walls around him vanished, and he was no longer in the labyrinth. Instead, he found himself standing in a room bathed in golden light, an ornate ballroom stretching before him. He could feel the cool marble beneath his feet and hear the faint echo of footsteps, soft, rhythmic, and familiar. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and flowers, the kind Dorothy had always worn. And there, standing in the center of the ballroom, was a figure, the silhouette of a woman, draped in a flowing gown, her back to him. It was Dorothy, but this time something was different. Something was off. Her body moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, but it was as though her movements were trapped in time, repeating in a cycle. She didn't turn to face him, but Jacob could feel her presence, pulling him closer. As he stepped forward, a voice not Dorothy's, but a deeper, darker version of her voice spoke from the shadows. The song is never complete. You must choose, Jacob. Choose before she finishes the dance. A cold shiver ran through him as he approached Dorothy. The air grew heavier, and the whispers swirled again, louder and more insistent. He could hear fragments of the song, half-formed verses echoing from all directions. The dance was almost over. He had to choose. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest as the voice from the shadows echoed through the ballroom, its tone dark and final. Choose before she finishes the dance. He took a step forward, drawn to Dorothy's figure, unable to turn away. Her graceful movements were hypnotic, as if she were floating rather than dancing, her gown swirling around her like a ghost's veil. But there was something unsettling in her stillness, something locked behind her eyes. She moved as though trapped, her body performing a waltz, but her face remained unmoving, as if frozen in time. Dorothy, Jacob whispered, but his voice was lost in the overwhelming sound of the haunting melody, the same song that had been pulling him deeper into this labyrinth. It wrapped around him like a cocoon, tightening with each passing second. The laughter, the whispers, the music, they all mixed together in a cacophony, filling his mind with fragments of memories he couldn't quite place. He could almost see her, not just as she was in her prime, but as she must have been, her youth, her ambition, her secrets. Dorothy Lamour, a star who had once captivated millions, now trapped in a dance that never ended. He took another step, closer this time. As his foot touched the cold marble, the whispers grew louder. The shadows seemed to ripple, and the room around him shifted. The once golden light flickered, and the walls began to stretch and bend, as though reality itself was being warped by the power of the song. You must choose, Jacob, the voice repeated, now almost a growl. Choose what you will become, a part of the dance, or a part of the song. Suddenly, Dorothy's face turned toward him, her expression unreadable, her eyes locked onto his. She smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that felt like a plea. Finish it, she whispered, her voice soft but insistent, a faint tremor of desperation lacing her words. The song can only end when you choose. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced. He didn't understand what was he supposed to do. The room pulsed with an unseen force, as if it were alive, as if the very walls were watching him, waiting for his decision. The dance continued. The music swirled faster now, building to a crescendo. Dorothy's figure spun in perfect rhythm, but with every turn, her eyes grew darker, more hollow. The air around him thickened, and his senses began to blur. The whispers now seemed to come from all directions, no longer just one voice, but many. The key, they said, the key is in the song. Jacob's chest tightened. He reached out toward Dorothy, but as he did, the floor beneath him trembled, and he stumbled back. The laughter echoed louder, and the voice from the shadows rumbled once more, deeper, more ominous. Choose, Jacob. You cannot stay here forever. Without thinking, Jacob's hand shot out toward the sound of the music, toward the very core of the dance. His fingers brushed the air, and in that instant, something shifted. The room seemed to collapse inward, and the music stopped, abruptly. Everything was still. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest. The shadows retreated, the mirrors returned to their places, and the walls of the ballroom vanished. The air felt suddenly lighter, and the oppressive weight lifted. But Dorothy was gone. The figure in the gown, the song, the dance, everything was gone. In the center of the room, the pool of water shimmered once again, its surface reflecting only the dim light of dawn. The soft fragrance of jasmine lingered, but there was no longer any sign of Dorothy Lamour. No voice, no song. Jacob stood in the empty room, his breath slow and steady, the silence ringing in his ears. He glanced around, his heart still racing, but the house was quiet. The labyrinth had vanished. There was nothing left but the hollow stillness of the room, and the faintest echo of a song carried on the breeze. It was over, or was it? As he turned to leave, the faintest sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He froze, and in the reflection of the water, he saw her again. Dorothy Lamour, her figure standing silently at the edge of the pool, staring back at him. "The song never ends," she whispered, and for the first time Jacob understood the truth. The house wasn't done with him yet. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.